The year is 1189, and I am Sir William de Montfort, a knight of the Third Crusade under the banner of King Richard the Lionheart. You might think being a medieval knight was all shining armour and glorious charges, but let me tell you something that the bards conveniently leave out of their songs. Most of my day involves dealing with problems that would make a modern soldier weep into his MRE. My biggest enemy isn't the Saracen armies or even the scorching heat of the Holy Land. It's trying to figure out how to eat breakfast without taking off my helmet. Because once that thing comes off, getting it back on requires 2 squires and a small miracle. Picture this. You wake up before dawn in a tent that's basically a canvas oven, wearing enough metal to armour a small horse, and the first thing you hear is someone shouting about watered-down wine and mouldy bread. Welcome to the glamorous life of a Crusader knight, where every morning starts with the delightful realization that yesterday's problems are still today's problems. Except now, they smell worse. The stories you hear about knights living like kings on campaign are about as accurate as a blind archer in a windstorm. Sure, might, we have fancy titles, Kiar, and family ests. But when you're camped outside Acre for months on end, that noble bloodline doesn't help much when the latrines overflow. But here's what really separates the wheat from the chaff in this holy war business. It's not how well you can swing a sword or how loud you can yell battle cries. It's mastering the art of staying alive when everything from your equipment to your food supply seems determined to kill you before the enemy gets a chance. Every knight learns quickly that survival depends on solving 100 small problems before they become big ones. Like figuring out how to keep your chainmail from rusting in the Mediterranean humidity, or discovering which camp followers actually know how to cook, versus which ones are just really good at starting fires. The thing about being a knight in the Holy Land is that your daily routine gets turned upside down faster than a merchant's cart in a siege. Back home in England, I knew exactly what each day would bring. Morning prayers, training with the sword, managing my lands, settling disputes between peasants who couldn't agree on whose pig ate whose cabbages. Simple, predictable, boring. Out here, you wake up not knowing if today you'll be storming castle walls, negotiating with Genoese merchants, or spending 6 hours trying to convince your destrier that the smell of burning siege engines isn't worth panicking about. My morning routine starts the same way every day, though the results vary wildly depending on what fresh disaster has struck the camp overnight. First comes the inspection ritual that separates professional knights from the pretenders who think warfare is all about looking intimidating. I check every link of my chainmail for damage because one weak spot can turn a glancing blow into a mortal wound. Then comes the real fun part. Convincing my squire, young Thomas, that yes, he really does need to oil every single piece of metal armour, even the parts that nobody can see. The boy's got enthusiasm, I'll give him that, but his attention detail makes a drunk monk look focused. The numbers tell an interesting story about our daily survival odds. A typical knight's equipment weighs about 70 pounds, not counting weapons. That's like carrying a full-grown sheep into battle, except the sheep isn't trying to help you kill people. My sword alone weighs 3 pounds, which doesn't sound like much until you've been swinging it for 2 hours straight while someone's trying to remove your head with a scimitar. The real weight comes from the mail hauberk, 30 pounds of interlocking iron rings that took some poor blacksmith 3 months to craft. When you add the coif, the gauntlets, and the great helm, you're basically a walking fortress made of metal and determination. But here's where things get interesting, and by interesting I mean potentially fatal. All that protective gear becomes a liability the moment you need to do anything besides stand still and look imposing. Try mounting a horse while wearing full mail, and you'll understand why knights need squires for more than just carrying their spare lances. The first time I tried it alone, I ended up hanging from my stirrup like a very expensive and very stuck piece of luggage. My destrier, Godfrey, seemed to find this amusing, though horses have a peculiar sense of humour that usually involves their rider's dignity. The morning inspection reveals problems that would make a quartermaster weep into his ledgers. My helm has developed a new dent courtesy of yesterday's skirmish with a group of Saracen raiders. The padding inside is starting to smell like something died in there, which is entirely possible considering how long it's been since I could properly clean it. Thomas suggests we might want to replace the padding with fresh wool, but good luck finding clean wool in a military camp where the sheep are either dead, eaten, or serving as projectiles in the next siege engine experiment. Water rationing adds another layer of complexity to the morning routine. Each knight gets roughly 2 quarts per day, which has to cover drinking, cooking, and the occasional desperate attempt at personal hygiene. Do the math on that, and you'll realize why most Crusader camps smell like a combination of unwashed humanity, horse manure, and whatever's rotting in the supply wagons. Some knights try to supplement their water ration by collecting dew from their tents, though this usually results in drinking water that tastes like canvas and disappointment. The real challenge comes with breakfast, which is a generous term for the collection of preserved foods that somehow pass for nourishment. Hard-tack biscuits that could double as projectile weapons, salted pork that's achieved the consistency of leather, and if we're lucky, some dried fruit that hasn't turned into a science experiment. One creative cook in our company discovered that soaking the hardtack in wine makes it slightly more edible, though it also makes the morning meal feel like a very sad drinking party. The wine itself deserves special mention, as it's been watered down so much that calling it wine is an insult to grapes everywhere. But the morning routine isn't just about personal maintenance and questionable breakfast choices. There's the daily ritual of checking on your brothers in arms, because in this business, the man next to you might be the difference between going home with glory or going home in a box. Sir Geoffrey de Clare, my tent mate, has developed a persistent cough that sounds like a death rattle mixed with the noise a rusty gate makes. He insists it's nothing serious, but I've seen enough campaign sickness to know that nothing serious has a way of becoming very serious very quickly. The morning briefing with our sergeant reveals the day's potential disasters, with all the cheerfulness of a funeral director discussing casket options. Today's mission involves escorting a supply convoy from Acre to our forward positions near the walls. Sounds simple enough until you factor in the Saracen cavalry that's been harassing our supply lines, the fact that half our horses are lame from yesterday's march, and the small detail that our supposed allies, the French knights, have decided they know a better route than the one our scouts recommended. Equipment checks reveal the ongoing battle against entropy that defines campaign life. My lance has developed a crack near the grip. My shield needs new leather strapping, and my sword requires sharpening after yesterday's encounter with what I suspect was either very hard armor or possibly a small boulder. Thomas produces his whetstones with the pride of a master craftsman, though his sharpening technique still makes me nervous. There's a fine line between honing a blade and accidentally turning a sword into an expensive dagger. The supply situation adds its own special flavour to our morning preparations. We're down to our last spare hawse. These shoes armourers are rationing nails like they're made of gold, and someone apparently thought it was a good idea to use our reserve strings as tent bow guy lines. These are the details that separate successful campaigns from historical footnotes about noble disasters in foreign lands. The morning assembly reveals the true complexity of managing a Crusader army. And by complexity, I mean controlled chaos with a thin veneer of military discipline. Knights from different regions argue about marching order with the passion of scholars debating theology, except scholars rarely threaten to settle their disputes with sharp metal objects. The English contingent insists we should take the coastal route, while the French knights advocate for an inland path that supposedly offers better foraging opportunities. Meanwhile, the Italian mercenaries are placing bets on which route will get us killed faster, though their odds-making skills are probably more reliable than our tactical planning. Our commander, Sir Baldwin de Redvers, attempts to bring order to this circus with the patience of a saint and the vocabulary of a particularly creative stable hand. He's got that special talent that all good leaders develop on campaign. The ability to make terrible decisions sound reasonable and inevitable disasters seem like minor inconveniences. Today's brilliant plan involves splitting our forces, because apparently having all our problems in one place wasn't enough. Half at challenging the knights will escort the supply wagons, while the other half conducts a reconnaissance in force toward the Saracen positions. This strategy has worked exactly never in military history, but tradition demands we try it anyway. The division of labor reveals interesting insights about medieval military psychology. Nobody wants escort duty because it's boring, dangerous, and offers minimal opportunities for glory. Everyone wants reconnaissance duty because it sounds exciting, until you remember that reconnaissance is just a fancy word for finding enemies who are specifically trying to kill you. Sir Geoffrey volunteers for escort duty, which tells me his cough is worse than he's admitting. A knight who turns down the chance for combat glory is either very sick or very wise, and Geoffrey's never been accused of excessive wisdom. Horse management becomes the next morning headache, and by headache I mean migraine-inducing nightmare that makes you question your career choices. My destrier Godfrey has developed what the horse leeches call thrush, which is basically foot rot for horses. The treatment involves daily cleaning with vinegar and prayers to Saint Eligius, patron saint of horses, and apparently lost causes. The vinegar we can manage, though it's the same stuff we use for cooking, which means tonight's meal will taste even worse than usual. The prayers come naturally to anyone who's spent time around military horses, though most of those prayers wouldn't be appropriate in church. The camp followers are own special there to morning contribution preparations, and by contribution I mean a steady stream of complaints, demands, and entrepreneurial schemes that would impress a Venetian merchant. Martha the washerwoman insists she needs more soap to properly clean our surcoats, though I suspect she's been trading our soap rations for wine with the sutlers. Black Tom the cook wants permission to butcher one of the pack animals because our salt pork has achieved a consistency that defies natural law. Meanwhile, young Peter the page has somehow managed to lose 3 horseshoes, 2 buckles, and what belt appears to be an entire tent pole. Aha! The morning weapon inspection reveals problems that would make an armourer weep into his forge. My backup sword has developed a nick in the blade that looks suspiciously like teeth marks, though I'm afraid to ask Thomas how that happened. The crossbow strings have absorbed so much moisture from the Mediterranean air that they've lost half their tension. Even the simple weapons are failing. My dagger's grip has started unwrapping itself, apparently deciding that staying attached to the blade is optional. Supply accounting brings its own unique form of mathematical torture. We started the campaign with provisions for 3 months, but somehow we're already down to 6 weeks of supplies after only 5 weeks in the field. Either the quartermaster failed basic arithmetic, or someone's been creative with the record keeping. My suspicion falls on the Genoese traders who've been following our army like vultures, offering to sell us our own supplies at inflated prices. They've got that special talent that merchants develop, the ability to make highway robbery sound like customer service. The morning religious observances provide a brief respite from logistical nightmares, though even prayer becomes complicated on campaign. Father Benedict leads us through morning prayers with the enthusiasm of someone who's forgotten why he thought joining a military expedition was a good idea. His Latin develope has a distinctly martial flavour over the past months, and I swear yesterday's blessing included what sounded like tactical advice, disguised as theological instruction. The man's adapted to campaign life better than some of the knights, though his definition of appropriate penance has become notably creative. Weather assessment adds another variable to our daily planning equation. The Mediterranean climate seemed pleasant enough when we first arrived, but spending months in metal clothing changes your perspective on temperature management. What feels like a pleasant morning breeze to a farmer becomes a potential enemy when you're wearing 70 pounds of iron. The heat builds throughout the day like interest on a moneylender's loan, and by afternoon we'll all be cooking inside our armour like expensive and very uncomfortable roasts. The morning briefing reveals intelligence gathered by our scouts, though intelligence might be too generous a term for the collection of rumours, guesses and wishful thinking that passes for military information. The Saracens have been spotted moving supplies toward their positions, which could forward mean they're preparing for an attack, settling in for a long siege, or possibly just trying to feed their own troops. Our spies report increased activity around the enemy camp, though increased activity could mean anything from military preparations to someone's wedding celebration. Communication with other Crusader contingents adds its own layer of complexity to mourning preparations. The French knights sent a messenger suggesting we coordinate our movements, though their idea of coordination usually involves everyone else following their lead while they take credit for any success. The German contingent remains diplomatically silent, which probably means they're planning something that won't involve consulting the rest of us until it's too late to object. Meanwhile, the Italian mercenaries continue offering their services to whoever pays best, which would be more reassuring if we had any money left to pay them with. The final morning ritual involves checking our escape routes, because experienced knights always plan for the possibility that today's glorious military operation might turn into tomorrow's desperate retreat. I've memorized 3 different paths back to our main camp, 2 alternate rallying points, and the location of every fresh water source within a day's hard ride. This isn't pessimism. It's professional survival instinct developed through years of watching optimistic knights become historical footnotes. As the morning sun climbs higher and the heat begins its daily assault on anyone foolish enough to wear metal clothing in the desert, I finish my preparations with the satisfaction of someone who's managed to solve today's immediate problems while creating tomorrow's new ones. The day ahead promises the usual mixture of boredom, terror, discomfort, and occasional moments of genuine purpose that define life on Crusade. Thomas secures the last strap on my armor with the pride of someone who's mastered a skill that probably won't be useful anywhere except a battlefield, and we prepare to discover what fresh disasters this day will bring to our holy mission. The morning inspection complete, we mount up with all the grace of arthritic monks attempting to climb cathedral walls. My destrier Godfrey seems to understand that today's mission involves actual work, because he's developed that special horse talent for making simple tasks unnecessarily complicated. Getting into the saddle while wearing enough metal to armor a siege engine requires a combination of timing, prayer, and the kind of athletic ability that would impress circus performers. Thomas gives me a boost that nearly launches me over the other side, and for a moment I'm hanging from my saddle like an expensive piece of luggage with delusions of military grandeur. Once mounted, the adventure begins. Our real convoy stretches out like a very slow, very vulnerable parade of everything the enemy would love to capture. Supply wagons creaking under loads of grain, salted meat, and replacement weapons make enough noise to wake saints in their tombs. The teamsters driving these mobile treasure troves have developed that special ability to curse continuously in 3 languages, while somehow making like casual its sound conversation. Behind them trudge the pack animals, loaded down with spare armor, medical supplies, and what passes for luxury items in a military camp, things like soap, wine that hasn't turned to vinegar, and boots that still remember what leather looks like. The formation we adopt would make military theorists weep into their treatises on proper cavalry deployment. Knights ride alongside the wagons in what our sergeant optimistically calls protective positions, though it looks more like organized confusion with horses. Some knights position themselves ahead of the convoy, others alongside, and a few bring up the rear with the enthusiasm of men who've drawn the short straw in life's great lottery. The problem with escort duty is that it combines all the excitement of watching grass grow with the constant possibility that someone might try to kill you without warning. Sir Geoffrey rides beside me, his cough echoing inside his helm like stones rattling in a bucket. He insists he's fine, but I've seen enough campaign sickness to recognize the signs of someone who's fighting more than just external enemies. The Holy Land has a way of testing every weakness in a man's constitution, and Geoffrey's been fighting this particular battle for weeks. His destrier seems to sense something's wrong too, because the normally spirited animal has taken on a protective gait that suggests even horses understand when their riders are struggling. The first hour with passes that makes you appreciate the kind of monotonous tension why some knights take up drinking as a serious hobby. Nothing happens, which in military terms means everything could happen at any moment. The scouts ride ahead and return with reports that basically amount to, "We haven't seen anything yet." But that doesn't mean nothing's there. This kind of helpful intelligence is why most knights develop a healthy skepticism about information gathered by people whose job involves getting close enough to enemies to actually see what they're doing. The terrain doesn't help our nerves any. We're traveling through country that offers excellent opportunities for ambush and absolutely no advantages for the people being ambushed. Rolling hills provide perfect cover for anyone wanting to watch convoy our lumber past, while the scattered olive groves could hide an entire cavalry force until they decided to announce themselves with sharp metal and war cries. Every shadow looks suspicious, every movement in the distance could be enemy scouts, and every bird that takes flight might have been startled by something more dangerous than our noisy procession. Thomas rides close enough to help if my armour decides to fall apart, but far enough away to avoid getting caught in any immediate disasters that might befall his knight. The boy's developed good instincts for campaign survival, though his tendency to jump at every unexpected sound suggests he hasn't quite mastered the art of productive paranoia that keeps experienced soldiers alive. He's got that wide-eyed alertness that comes from real throw-seizing, that all training sessions with wooden swords were just practice for situations where people use real metal with genuine intent to cause harm. The supply wagons reveal their own collection of problems as the morning progresses. One wheel develops a wobble that sounds like it's planning to fail at the worst possible moment. Another wagon's load has shifted, creating a lean that makes the whole contraption look like it's auditioning for a career as a siege engine projectile. The Teamsters handle these developing disasters with the philosophical acceptance of men who've learned that complaining about inevitable problems just wastes energy better spent on solving them or drinking away the memory of trying. Our formation attracts attention from the local wildlife, and by wildlife, I mean the collection of camp followers, merchants, and opportunists who trail military expeditions like seagulls following fishing boats. They maintain a respectful distance that suggests they understand the difference between profitable enterprise and suicidal stupidity, but their presence means our movements are about as secret as a cathedral bell. Anyone with eyes can count our numbers, assess our cargo, and probably make educated guesses about our destination and timing. The heat begins its daily assault on anyone foolish enough to wear metal clothing in Mediterranean sunshine. What started as a pleasant morning breeze transforms into something that feels like opening an oven door while standing inside the oven. My mail hauberk, which felt reasonably comfortable an hour ago, now seems determined to conduct every available ray of sunlight directly onto my skin. The padding underneath has achieved that special combination of damp and scratchy that makes you understand why some knights go mad during long campaigns. Godfrey's behaviour provides an early warning system better than any scout report. His ears swivel constantly, testing the air for scents that don't belong, and his gait has developed that subtle tension that suggests he's ready to transition from peaceful transportation to combat mobility without much notice. Experienced warhorses develop this sixth sense about danger, and smart knights learn to trust their mount's instincts more than their own optimistic assumptions about enemy intentions. The mid-morning sun reveals details about our convoy that weren't visible in dawn's forgiving light. Our numbers are smaller than they appeared in the camp's morning assembly. Our weapons show more wear than any quartermaster would approve, and our horses display the kind of condition that suggests they've been working harder and eating less than optimal cavalry management would recommend. We look less like the flower of Christian knighthood and more like a travelling exhibition of military equipment that's seen better decades. Sir Baldwin rides ahead to confer with the scouts, his conversation involving enough pointing and head shaking to suggest the news isn't entirely encouraging. Military leadership during the Crusades requires a special talent for making bad situations sound manageable and impossible. Odds seem merely challenging. When commanders start using phrases like tactical flexibility and alternative approaches, experienced soldiers begin checking their escape routes and making sure their weapons are easily accessible. The convoy's pace slows as we navigate terrain that seems specifically designed to challenge wheeled vehicles and test the patience of mounted escorts. Rocks appear where the road should be smooth. Mud develops in places that should be dry, and every hill reveals another hill that somehow wasn't visible from the previous vantage point. The teamsters demonstrate remarkable creativity in their vocabulary, while coaxing their animals through obstacles that would challenge mountain goats with engineering degrees. Dust becomes a constant companion, coating everything with a fine layer that makes breathing an adventure and visibility a luxury. Knights at the front of the column enjoy relatively clear air, while those bringing up the rear exist in a cloud that would challenge a philosopher's understanding of the relationship between matter and space. My position midway through the formation provides the perfect combination of dust exposure and strategic vulnerability that makes escort duty such a popular assignment among knights with a sense of humour about military service. The morning's progress reveals the fundamental mathematics of medieval logistics, and by mathematics I mean the kind of arithmetic that would make accountants weep into their ledgers. We're covering roughly 2 miles per hour, which means our planned 6-hour journey will actually take something closer to 8 hours, assuming nothing goes wrong. In military campaigns, assuming nothing will go wrong is like assuming the sun will rise in the west. Technically possible in some alternate universe, but not recommended for practical planning purposes. Water management becomes a pressing concern as the sun climbs higher, and our metal clothing begins its daily impression of portable furnaces. Each knight carries roughly a day's water ration, but sweating inside armour burns through liquid supplies faster than a siege engine burns through ammunition. The teamsters have access to barrels of water for the animals, but strict rationing means human consumption takes second priority to keeping the horses and oxen functional enough to complete the mission. The psychological challenge of escort duty reveals itself as the morning progresses. Combat, for all its obvious dangers, at least provides clear objectives and immediate feedback about success or failure. Escort duty involves hours of heightened alertness for threats that might never materialize, combined with the knowledge that when something does happen, it will probably happen very quickly and without much advance warning. It's like being constantly prepared for a surprise party, where the surprise involves people trying to kill you. Communication along the column relies on a system of hand signals, horn calls, and shouted messages that work about as well as you'd expect when filtered through the noise of creaking wagons, clanking armour, and animals expressing their opinions about the day's workload. Important information travels from front to rear like rumours in a marketplace. Each retelling adds creative details while somehow losing crucial facts. By the time a message reaches the convoy's end, it bears roughly the same relationship to the original as wine bears to grapes after a very long fermentation process. The road ahead disappears into terrain that offers excellent opportunities for anyone wanting to demonstrate the tactical advantages of choosing when and where to start a fight. Every bend could conceal an ambush, every rise might reveal enemy positions, and every shadow cast by the increasingly harsh sun could hide archers with professional interest in converting our convoy into a collection of abandoned wagons and very still knights. The terrain ahead transforms from merely challenging into something that looks like God decided to test whether medieval knights have any sense of self-preservation. The road, and I use that term generously, winds through a series of ravines that would make excellent graveyards for overconfident cavalry units. Each turn reveals new opportunities for enterprising enemies to demonstrate why ambushing supply convoys has become such a popular profession in the Holy Land. The olive groves that seem picturesque from a distance now loom like perfect hiding spots for anyone with professional interest in redistributing our carefully guarded supplies. Sir Geoffrey's cough has developed an alarming wet quality that echoes inside his helm like water dripping in a cave. He's trying to maintain the stoic demeanour expected of knights, but I can see him swaying slightly in his saddle during the rougher patches of road. Campaign fever has a way of turning strong men into shadows of themselves, and Geoffrey's been fighting this particular battle longer than he's been fighting Saracens. His destrier keeps glancing back at him with that peculiar horse intuition that suggests even the animals understand when something's seriously wrong. The sun reaches that special angle where it seems personally determined to cook every knight in the Holy Land until we're tender enough to fall off the bone. My mail hauberk has transformed from protective armour into what feels like a very expensive and very uncomfortable oven designed specifically to roast whoever's foolish enough to wear it. The padding underneath has achieved that perfect combination of soaked and scratchy that makes you question every life choice that led to this moment. Thomas rides close enough to help if needed, but far enough away to avoid the waves of heat radiating from my increasingly furnace-like equipment. The convoy stretches out like a very slow parade of everything our enemies would love to capture, and the teamsters have begun that creative cursing that indicates they're approaching the limits of their professional patience. One wagon develops a wheel wobble that sounds like it's practicing for a spectacular failure, while another begins listing to one side with the enthusiasm of a ship taking on water. The oxen pulling these mobile disasters seem to understand that today's work involves more than their usual contractual obligations, and they're expressing their opinions through the ancient art of strategic stubbornness. Our scouts return with reports that basically amount to, "We still haven't seen anything definitive," but the absence of obvious threats doesn't mean the absence of threats. This kind of military intelligence is why experienced knights develop that healthy paranoia that keeps them alive long enough to become old, scarred, and wise enough to avoid escort duty altogether. The lead scout, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, who's survived more campaigns than most men survive winters, has developed that 1,000-yard stare that suggests he's seeing things the rest of us are too optimistic to notice. The formation we're maintaining would make military theorists weep into their treatises on proper convoy security. Knights ride alongside the wagons in what our sergeant optimistically calls protective positions, though it looks more like organised confusion with armour. Some of us stay close to the supplies, others range out to watch the flanks, and a few unlucky souls bring up the rear with the kind of enthusiasm normally reserved for attending your own funeral. The mathematical reality is that we're spread too thin to provide real security, and too concentrated to avoid making an attractive target. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, and our battered convoy finally limps into the relative safety of our forward camp, I reflect on what separates the living from the legends in this holy war business. It wasn't the shining armour or the noble bloodlines that got us through today. It was mastering the art of staying alive when everything from rusty mail to spoiled water seemed determined to kill us before the Saracens got their chance. The bards will never sing about checking for loose straps or rationing water like liquid gold, but those mundane details are what transform starry-eyed crusaders into grizzled veterans. Tomorrow will bring fresh disasters, new equipment failures, and probably worse food. But tonight we've earned our rest through the simple miracle of surviving another day in the Holy Land. That's the real glory of knighthood. Not the dramatic charges or glorious victories, but the quiet satisfaction of solving 100 small problems before they become fatal ones.